Hi folks, Josh Wolfe with Wolfe Vintage Watches here. Welcome to my shop. In this video, I'll be servicing a Hamilton caliber 688 manual wind movement from a 1962 Hamilton Sea Rover II. Let's get into it. Stick around till the end of the video where I link you to my review of the completed watch. Okay, let's get this beat up expansion bracelet off the watch. These types of end links wear down the inside of the lug since the metal piece pushes out, so this has got to go. Overall, a very clean watch. Since this is a one-piece case, the stem is a two-piece or split stem. There are a couple of styles of split stems, but I know that for this one, I need to pull the crown and male half of the stem straight out, which always freaks me out a little. Here you can see the male half of the split stem, which snaps into the female half that is still in the movement. This sci-fi looking tool squeezes the crystal along its circumference so I can remove the crystal from the case. I fit the lift over the crystal, and as I tighten it down, each of those brass fingers squeeze in towards the center. I want to tighten the lift only as much as I need to prevent any damage or marring of the crystal. Here's a good look at the lift and how it pinches the sides of the crystal. Alright, now I can remove the handset. Using a piece of plastic to protect everything, I use hand levers to gently pry the hands off the wheel, pinion, and pivot that their pressure fit onto. With the hands removed, I can take the dial and movement out of the case. I flip everything over and give a little tap to nudge it loose from the case. This is the movement ring, which holds the movement in place in the case. To take the dial off, I loosen the two dial feet screws on the side of the main plate. Taking care not to bend or damage the dial, I use a screwdriver to work the dial feet loose from their holes. This explains why the dial didn't just lift off. Look at all that excess grease from the keyless works on the underside of the dial. And here you can see how the extra grease in the keyless works has migrated around to the top of the movement. Had it found its way to the pallet pivot, it would have stopped the watch dead. Starting on the dial side, I remove the hour wheel. This part is also a little sticky, likely from the aforementioned excess grease. I decided to clean up some of the grease now to try to keep my tweezers reasonably clean during the rest of disassembly. Parts stick to greasy tweezers, which makes things more difficult. With most of the old grease out of the way, I can remove the minute work cock. This part is held in place by two very small screws. Well, all the screws are tiny, but these screws are tinier. So much for keeping my tweezers sorta clean. Grease has worked itself onto the underside of the minute wheel, holding it onto the minute work cock. A quick wipe down on my tweezers and I can remove the canyon pinion with driving wheel. Next, the setting wheel is removed. The first component of the keyless works that needs to be removed is the setting lever spring. This shows you how not only is excess lubrication bad in and of itself, but it also attracts and holds onto other debris. This debris is what causes the actual damage to the watch. Now I can remove the yoke spring. Now I can safely grab the yoke. Again, I'll clean up as much of the grease here as I can. It'll help with further disassembly, but it'll also mean less grease in the cleaning solvent. To remove the setting lever, I loosen the screw on the dial side and the lever falls off on the watchmaker side. Here I'm removing the female half of the split stem. I'll dig the winding pinion and the clutch wheel out of the grease pit here. Okay, now I need to let the mainspring down so I can get to work on the watchmaker side of the movement. I'll wind the ratchet wheel up just enough to move the click out of the way, then slowly let the power down by letting the screwdriver slip between my fingers. That done, I unscrew the ratchet wheel and the reverse threaded crown wheel screw. Off comes the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel. Now I can get at the crown wheel ring. The click spring is easily removed since it's not under any load, and then I can grab the click. Now I can loosen and remove all of the bridge screws. To remove the barrel bridge, I get it started by prying it loose from its alignment pins with a screwdriver. Then I snatch it up with my tweezers. Remember to grab the setting lever screw before moving on. The train wheel bridge is also pried up. The big difference here is that I need to be very mindful that I don't put any pressure on the pivots of the wheels. The first wheel out is the sweep second wheel. Now I can get at the third wheel. I'll grab the barrel now to make way for the intermediate wheel. The escape wheel is now removed. To remove the top balance jewel setting, I rotate the shock absorber counterclockwise to lift it out of the way. Then I can carefully lift the jewel setting out of the balance cock. Then, to make sure I don't damage the shock, I close it back up. Here I'm removing the balance cock. Just like the train wheel and barrel bridges, a screwdriver is used to pry the component away from the alignment posts on the main plate. Sliding my tweezers underneath the balance wheel to hold it steady and not allowing the hairspring to be pulled down, I remove the entire assembly. Now I can remove the pallet cock. The final part to come out of the watchmaker side is the pellet fork. Well, hair stuck in grease wrapped around the pellet fork isn't good. With the main plate stripped, I can now take the mainspring out of the barrel. Pressing the arbor against the steel plate, I pop the barrel cap off and take it off completely with my tweezers. I can then work the arbor out and get started on the mainspring itself. Starting at the end, I can walk the mainspring out with my thumbs. There's a lot of energy stored up in this mainspring, so it's important to keep pressure on the coiled portion of the mainspring with my thumbs. When I get to the other end of the mainspring, I slow down a little bit to prevent the end from snapping out, potentially damaging whatever end type it's using. This particular mainspring has a tongue end. Now that all the parts are out of their heated ultrasonic horological solvent and rinse spa and have dried completely, I can rewind the mainspring using my vintage winders. The small barb on the post of the winder fits into the end of the mainspring. This is then inserted into the handle and the mainspring can be wound back up. I apply pressure on the winding arbor as well as on the handle with my left hand to keep the mainspring coils aligned as I wind the mainspring with my right. On the tongue end of manual wind mainsprings like these, I need to use tweezers to seat the end inside of the handle. Removing the winding arbor must be done carefully as well. You can see how tight the mainspring gets wound inside the handle here. Now I take the handle and press it firmly into the barrel. Once I'm certain the barrel and handle are in line with each other, I press down the plunger in the handle, which will push the wound mainspring into the barrel. A little lubrication on the barrel arbor before I work it into the end of the mainspring and the bottom barrel hole. And a bit more oil for the top of the arbor, and I can refit the barrel cap. Using my tweezers, I make sure the barrel cap is fully seated into the barrel. Auto oilers make oiling the cap jewel settings a breeze. And now I can get on with reinstalling the training wheels, starting with the escape wheel, followed by the intermediate wheel. Then the third wheel is lined up with the pivot hole, making sure the teeth mesh with the intermediate wheel. Obviously, sometimes things get bumped and moved around a bit as parts are being reinstalled. It's important to just take your time and readjust as you move along. I found I make the most mistakes when I'm hustling to get something done, or paying more attention to a podcast than the watch I'm hunched over. Speaking of which, I like listening to the Casual Watch Talk podcast while working. Leave your favorite watch-related podcast in the comments. Before I reinstall the sweep second wheel, I'll lubricate the extended pivot. The sweep second wheel is inserted through the center tube, and again, I take my time to make sure all the wheels are lined up properly, as well as seated in their bottom pivot holes. And now I can work on getting the train wheel bridge refitted. I think this was the most difficult procedure for me when I first started servicing watches, and some movements are definitely harder than others. The 688 and other movements in the family aren't too bad in this respect, but it does take a steady hand and a relaxed patience to guide all four wheels into the top pivot holes at the same time. If you watch closely, you can see the moment where everything lines up and the bridge drops into place. I've learned the hard way to always test for free movement of the train wheels before really pushing the bridge home, and certainly before screwing it back into place. I may be able to see all the pivots, but that doesn't mean the teeth of all the wheels are meshed properly, and there is the risk of crushing them. With good free movement confirmed, I can screw the train wheel bridge down with 2 screws. I'll throw the setting lever screw in now and lubricate the bottom hole for the barrel. That done, I can slide the barrel into place and get the barrel bridge refitted. The barrel bridge is secured with 3 screws. I'll also check to see if the wheels continue to spin for a few seconds, indicating there is very little friction, which, of course, is exactly what we want. Now I can install the pellet fork. The concept here is pretty straightforward. I just need to line up the pallet pivot with the pivot hole, make sure that the pallet arm is between the 2 banking pins, and the pallet stones are on the same plane as the teeth of the escape wheel. Only then can I refit the pallet cock in place, which poses its own set of challenges. The 2 alignment pins need to line up with their respective holes as well as the pivot hole before seating completely. In practice, this can sometimes take a fair amount of manipulation to get the pallet and pallet cock seated in the correct positions. Once the pallet fork is situated, the pallet cock can be refitted, making sure not to damage the pallet pivot. Now I'll lubricate the top barrel hole and install the crown wheel ring. The click is about as easy as it gets to put back into place. And you'll just have to trust me on this, but I put the click spring back into place before refitting the crown wheel. It was a blurry mess that I couldn't bring myself to subject you to. Also, I fired my cameraman. Here I'm lubricating the crown wheel ring before I get the crown wheel screw back in. Lefty-tighty when it comes to the crown wheel screw. The ratchet wheel's square hole fits over the barrel arbor. This is what will do the actual winding of the barrel arbor and thus the mainspring. Using a plastic pick to hold the ratchet wheel steady, I tighten down the ratchet wheel screw. Now I can add a little wind to the mainspring to power the train of wheels. I want to see that power is transmitted properly through the watch. I test this by watching how the pallet fork indexes against the escape wheel. I'll now lubricate the exit stone of the pallet fork with a special grease made just for this purpose. And now to reinstall the balance assembly to really find out what kind of progress I'm making. If I haven't cleaned the parts well enough, or have otherwise missed some fault with the watch, the balance will not start to swing. I work the balance wheel under the sweep seconds wheel, make sure that the impulse jewel is on the correct side of the pallet arm, and line up the balance staff with the lower pivot hole. At this point, I'm expecting to see the balance wheel to start to beat on its own. I gently nudge the balance around to see if I can clear whatever it might be hung up on, or to get the staff to seat into the lower pivot hole. I give it another bit of persuasion, and boom! We have a beating balance wheel. I'll get the balance cock secured down with a screw to make sure nothing moves around. To prepare to install the top balance jewel setting, I'm opening up the kiff shock here. After a thorough cleaning, I'm applying some light oil to the capstone. With capillary action, the setting and capstone suck together, which I can then reinstall into the balance cock. Pressing down on the little tab that is at about the 11 o'clock position on the shock, I rotate the brass shock back into place, securing the jewel setting into the balance cock. Here I'm lubricating the pivots with my auto oilers. Now onto the dial side where I continue oiling the pivots. I'll start with the keyless works and the setting lever. I put it in place on the setting lever screw, hold it in place with my fingertip, then partially screw it in. Do you recognize these parts now that they're not slathered in a goopy mess of old grease? Applying a much more reasonable amount of the correct grease, I'll lubricate the winding pinion and clutch wheel. When it comes to lubrication, in my opinion, the first rule is that less is more. Over-lubricating will destroy a watch far sooner than under-lubricating. In goes the clutch wheel, followed by its sibling, the winding pinion. I can now lubricate the various faces of the female half of the stem, as well as the tip where it contacts the main plate. I also want to place a little grease in the groove where the post from the setting lever will ride. Looking through the haze of my bangs, did I say that I fired my cameraman? You can kind of see me installing the female half of the stem. That means I can finish tightening down the setting lever screw. Now for the rest of the keyless works. I'll apply grease to the post that the yoke articulates around. The yoke, sometimes also referred to as the return bar, is fitted back into the movement. I make sure that it is riding in the groove of the clutch wheel. Here I'm lubricating between the setting lever and the yoke. And lest I make the mistake of over-lubricating, I'll clean up after myself. Now I can get the yoke spring loaded back in. This spring pushes on the yoke, which, depending on the position of the stem, will hold the clutch wheel against the winding pinion or against the setting wheel. As mentioned earlier, this is a stout spring, so I guard against lost parts by holding a pick in place. Once the spring is seated, I make sure the yoke hasn't moved out of position. Now I can lubricate where the spring and yoke come into contact with each other. The setting lever spring is next to be reinstalled. This part keeps the other components in place as well as creates the two positions of the crown with these two grooves that I'm lubricating right here. Time to lean, time to clean. This is the underside of the canyon pinion with driving wheel. I apply lubrication to the canyon pinion where the arms of the driving wheel come into contact with it. This will prevent wear and tear as well as give a smooth feel when setting the time. And that assembly goes back into place. Some heavy oil for the minute wheel and setting wheel posts. Which can only mean that it's time to install the minute wheel and the setting wheel. If I don't catapult the minute wheel into oblivion first. To hold these components in place is the minute work cock. Other than the hairspring stud screw, these two screws for the minute work cock are the smallest on the entire movement. I need to loosen the dial feet screws to make way for the dial feet. The final part to go on is the hour wheel. I prep the dial with a light cleaning with some Rodico. Lining up the 3 o'clock marker with the stem and the hole with the hour wheel, the dial feet will find their respective holes as well. Then using gravity to hold the movement onto the dial, I'll tighten the dial feet screws back down. These press against the dial feet, securing the dial to the movement. Alright, I wound the watch all the way up and I'm going to give it an initial regulation. Moving the wider arm of the adjustable stud holder here adjusts the beat. Moving the skinnier arm of the regulator adjusts the time. I'm pretty close, so just the smallest of adjustments to speed the watch up a bit. Plus 4 seconds per day and 0.2 milliseconds beat error on an initial regulation? I'll take it for now and really dial it in after a couple days of running it in. Let's get this sucker cased up. In goes the movement ring. Then I can guide the stem through the case tube and seat the movement into the movement ring. Some final cleanup of the dial here. To install the crown and stem, I make sure the male and female halves are lined up and then just press firmly on the crown. With the ability to set the timer stored, I install the handset beginning with the hour hand. Using a hand pressing tool, the hour hand is just pressure fit onto the hour wheel. I pay attention to the clearance between the hour hand and the dial so it won't scratch. My bangs also want to make another cameo, evidently. Now I line up the hour hand with the 12 o'clock and line up the minute hand with the hour hand. Using the same hand pressing tool and having the same bangs fouling up the shot, I press fit the minute hand onto the canyon pinion. I'm checking for clearance between both the hands, and then I did a decent job of lining them up with the 12 o'clock here. I use these adhesive swabs on the hands to give them a final once-over. The second hand is now pressed onto the pivot of the sweep second wheel. When checking for clearance, I noticed that the second hand was curved downward and was contacting the minute hand. I brought the second hand over to my steel block and carefully straightened it out. I don't want to push too hard or try to get the curve out with one pass, as that can break it. I gently rub the second hand until I think enough of the curve is removed and try it again on the watch. Nailed it. Let's get a crystal on this guy. I polished the scratches out of the acrylic crystal off camera and am cleaning up any bits of dust with a blower and the adhesive swabs. Using this little jig, my crystal lift can now squeeze the crystal into a small enough diameter to be fit back into the watch. Once I'm sure the bottom edge of the crystal is seated back into the case, when I loosen the lift, the crystal will expand back to size and press itself against the sides of the case. To see other service and restoration videos, click the playlist on the left. To check out my review of the completed 1962 Hamilton Sea Rover II, click on the video on the right. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share, and leave your comments and questions below. As always, thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye.